thank you all for coming, and thanks to the Nerman for having me and Christy for that great introduction. So first of all, I thought I'd start by just telling you a little bit about me, okay? Yes, I am very Southern. Bless your heart. I come from a big Southern family, and already they've been very interested in the arts, although it was always about music for them. I was the only one that didn't get the music gene. I don't know what happened, but I did dance. So arts were always a big part of our life. The other thing that was important to know is that I have a brother with Down syndrome. This is my brother, Bud. He's showing you his muscles. So he was highly influential on me all my life. He was my big brother. And when I started undergraduate school, I actually started pre-med biology. Initially, I was going to get an MD-PhD combination, and I thought that I would go into genetic research. But something happened. So at Columbus State University at the time, they were switching from the quarter system to the semester system. And yes, I know, I just aged myself. So I went to my advisor and said, okay, what do I need to do next semester or next quarter? And he said, okay, here's what you do, okay? You take something that doesn't matter. You take something that's just for fun, electives that'll fulfill financial aid requirements. And I said, okay. So I took photography, and I took modern and contemporary art history, and it changed everything for me. So with photography, what I found was kind of a marriage between two things I was passionate about, that being art and science. And what I found in modern and art history was, in contemporary art history, was I learned about what art was. And through the two, I had sort of an epiphany. I realized that I was way more interested in giving my brother a voice than I was in necessarily fixing him. So throughout my work, and I'm going to show you just a few glimpses of really early work, but throughout my work, starting with these very early days, all the way through to now, there are 4 basic themes or threads, if you will, that you'll see. The first is a tension between vulnerability and security or safety. Okay, so to give you a good example, I think family kind of shows this. Like with our family, right, they know every single embarrassing story. They know all of our warts. But presumably, in a healthy family at least, that's also where you're the safest because they love you despite all those faults, right? And you feel safe with them. The second is that for me, I try and make art that's what I call serious play. The serious being the topics. I take research very seriously. I want to know my subject. The play being experimenting with mediums. I love like mixing it, trying to keep that kind of attitude of I wonder what would happen if all the time. The third is the personal is political, or maybe as a twist on that second wave feminist phrase, the personal is universal. Meaning that the topics that I try and pick are the ones in which I start with something personal, something I'm really vested into, but I'm looking for where that personal experience intersects with a larger sociopolitical kind of topic. And then finally, the fourth is feminism and queer theory, so which we'll get into a little deeper in a minute. So when I first started graduate school, I was very interested in working specifically with my brother. I was doing a whole lot of trying to explain, doing portrait work with him, following him around and trying to express his sense of marginalization as much as I could. But one day, I was walking down the hall in art school at Georgia State, and someone had spray painted graffiti all along the graduate school doors, the graduate studio doors, dyke bar and gay bar. They misspelled dyke bar, they spelled it D-I-K. That'll come up again later. So I went home and was really distraught. That like vulnerability, security kind of tension, that was art school for me. And I felt like it had just been invaded. So I went home and I'm like bailing on my partner like you do, right? Telling her all about my day. And she rightly pointed out that this was the first time, now that I was sort of outing myself as a part of the queer community, that I had ever experienced direct ridicule. But that my brother had probably lived his whole life experiencing it because he was phenotypically so different. So it changed my project. All of a sudden I realized that I wasn't just interested in expressing him, but the link between us, not just as siblings, but as people who were othered and marginalized. So I came back and this project entitled Linked One Each, it's bookended with these 2 almost life-size mural prints. This is the first one that you would see. And we have these signs on our back kind of like kick me signs. And then if you'll notice, he's leading me. His foot is forward, and I'm really sort of hesitant. Again, as someone who, he had experienced this whole life, but this was new to me. In between the two mural prints are several smaller prints. They're roughly 20 by 24. And I started taking an inventory of all the different ways that we share needs and desires, even though maybe they're exemplified or fulfilled in different ways. So you'll see his breath being a literal breath through his oxygen tube. My breath being perhaps that of a lover's kiss. His breath being his disability. And my breath being wrestling with sexual orientation. And then it's ended with this other mural print. Now with this one, we're facing the viewer, and his eyes are closed, and now I'm leading him. For me, this felt like a really important moment. I wanted to acknowledge my privilege as someone who's literally taking these photos of him, and accept my responsibility in creating the project. The other thing that happened in graduate school that was really profound for me was that I was teaching, and I had an opportunity to take a group of students to an exhibition entitled Censorship Potentially Harmful. And this was the first thing that you were presented with when you went into the gallery. So just to kind of set up the room for you, this is by Dred Scott. And what you're seeing is a large American flag on the floor, and there's a shelf with a book on it, and the viewer is invited to write in the book. Okay, but you can't write in the book unless you step on the flag. And it was a strange moment for me because I found I couldn't do it. Now I'm an artist, I understand metaphor, I'm all about freedom of speech, like I get it, so it was a weird kind of thing. Again, went home, I'm talking to my partner, and Lisa being Lisa went, we're gonna solve this. So just the two of us went back to the gallery, and we danced on the flag, took it all over the gallery actually, we were very irreverent, and put it back, and I wrote in the book. Now I say all this because what it did for me was it explained the power of installation. I love Sally Mann, but when I go see a Sally Mann exhibition, I come away and I describe it. I'll tell you what it looks like, right? Maybe I might get to telling you what it made me think about or how it made me feel. But with this, it was really different. I went away and told you what I did. It became a personal experience. So I wanted to make work like that. I wanted to include the viewer in an experience. So my very first solo exhibition was entitled Salt. And again, let me kind of set the room up for you. So you walk in, you're presented with a dual channel video projection of larger than life, very large, women that kind of almost army-like formation. They walk in front of you, they present themselves, they turn around, they exit. These are all women who identify as a part of the queer community, so they're also in the process outing themselves. Across the gallery, you see a line of salt, salt being an interesting metaphor for duality. It hurts, but it heals, right? And then in that, scratched out of the salt, are the two different versions of the word dyke, right? Dyke, D-Y-K-E, being a derogatory term for a lesbian. If you are standing on this side like those two viewers there, you're opposing the community, and you read the word dyke, D-Y-K-E. If you step across the sand, the line in the sand, or the salt in this case, and you turn and you join the community as an ally or a participant, then the word changes to D-I-K-E, and that's a protective barrier, a dam that keeps a town from being flooded. The sound that you're hearing in the room is the Holland folktale of the little boy who put his finger in the dike in order to prevent the town from being flooded. He saved the town. Only there's some changes. So the changes that I made to that story is that every time the word dike is used has been omitted to draw the attention back to the words on the floor. And also everywhere there's a male character has been substituted for female. Again, all about an example of vulnerability and security within a community. So I'm going to start this and let it just play. So as I mentioned before, I've always been very interested in something called queer theory. So let me kind of explain. Queer theory was fathered by Michael Foucault. And what he was looking at was a way to dissolve binaries. And what I mean by binaries is that we go through life and we think of everything as an either or, right? Like you apply for a job and you're supposed to check the box, are you black or are you white? But most of us know if you do a cheek swab, you'll find we're all mutts, right? Nobody's really purely anything. Male and female are sex, That seems the most basic, right? Like you're born and it's a boy or it's a girl. But there are people who are born with XXY chromosomal patterns. Where do they fit? There are people that are hermaphrodites. I have a hermaphrodite dog. Where do they fit? So he was always looking for the places where those either or gets blurred. For me, I specifically wanted to create some sort of visual symbol that would demonstrate that blurring of the binary between gay and straight. Okay? So again, people will say, are you gay or straight? But here's the thing, guys. Most of my straight friends will admit to masturbating. That's a same-sex relationship, right? Okay, so I'm just saying. So I created this very benign footage of this rose, right? But when most people see it, they say it's erotic. Okay, if we all get turned on by rose, does that mean we're herbosexual? Okay, so basically getting at human sexuality is a spectrum. Rarely, if ever, do you find someone who truly is one way or the other, and being very interested in that blurring of binaries. So now I'm blushing, and we're going to go get out of this quickly. All right, so several of my video installations came together in a solo exhibition entitled Wanna Watch, and this is just a gallery shot of that. So now for something completely different. My big southern family that I told you about has started dwindling over the past decade, dwindling in size. Some of it due to the fact that people of my generation, are not having as many children. Some of it due to the fact that the older generation is naturally starting to die. So there was a short period of time where everybody in my family started dying. My aunt died, then my grandmother died, then my grandfather died, and then my father died. And it was a really rough time. So I inherited this house from my grandparents. And believe it or not, about 9 months before these pictures were taken, it was a cute little cottage, but no one living there. There was a storm, and before you know it, it's like this. Clearly was going to have to be demolished. But I was struggling with it. This like ratted, tattered house was my family to me. It wasn't that house. So I started off wanting to use this as a metaphor for my psychological state, and I took these pictures. And what I found is that they don't work. When people look at them, with photography, it's a little different. When a painter paints something, the viewer assumes an artist's hand, right? And it's easy for people to wrap their head around whatever they're seeing as being a metaphor. Photography is different. The first assumption is that there's some sort of truth, right? And then maybe they'll get around to a metaphor with a lot of work from photographers, if you ask the ones in the room. So I didn't think that this was very successful. People would go, what happened? And they were having a hard time getting to the metaphor I was interested in. But what it did is it got me started. So the other thing that I had inherited were all of my grandmother's canning jars. So what I did was I went back to the house before it was demolished, and I started collecting bits of things, trying to hold on to what I could of that house for me. I also, as I started mapping out this idea of an installation, started going to other people who had loss and inviting them to put things in the jars. And then weirdly, people started contacting me and asking me to contribute. So all of it came together in this installation entitled Preserves. They're laid out on the floor, sort of in the shape of a coffin. And periodically, there are empty ones with just a tea-light candle in them. So there's a ritual involved too. At the beginning, we'll light the candles and then blow them out at the end. The past couple times I've shown it, I've also started leaving on the edge some empty jars so that as viewers come through the exhibition, they can add things to it. Again, that serious play, part of the research, the seriousness of this, I stumbled upon Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. So that felt important to include in the body of work. So I went back to some of those people that I'd met before and asked if I could do portraits of them with objects that represented people that they had lost. And they're always shown in a series of 5 to wink at Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. So here you have acceptance, denial, anger, bargaining, and depression. So then one day, I was driving out on Country Road in South Georgia, and I stumbled upon this tree. I saw this tree in the middle of this big, big, beautiful pasture. And I had a really visceral reaction to it. So, not really sure why. I started going back, photographing it over and over and over and over again, every day. Same tree every day. And what resulted was this, which is a silver gelatin mural print of about 4 feet by 4 feet square, and this installation. So this was kind of a moment of healing for me from a lot of deaths, and I created something I wanted to make something that pointed to seasons and life cycles. So you'll see that there's 4 different panels. They each represent basically a season. Each of the panels has 7 across and 7 down boxes that are 7 inches square, winking at the days of the week. And then every single one of those is a hand-developed wet lab print from all those times of shooting. And they're encased in encaustic wax. They also have dirt and other kind of natural materials mixed in. This is a detail from that installation. This is the fall panel. For some reason, it really felt important to use earth things or natural things. So I hand dyed these silver gelatin prints with coffee, tea, wine, and chlorophyll. And then I used the encaustic wax to mold it so they would sort of look like leaves blowing a little bit. All of it, again, looking at cycles. And then my brother died. So it's hard for me when I get to this part, forgive me. So when he died, it was a very different death. For one thing, he was an innocent, right? And it always seems the most tragic when there's a loss of an innocent. Then also his death was really very intimate in a different way. My grandparents, when they died, there were wills, there was business to be had, and it sort of offered a distraction, kinda. When my brother died, he left nothing other than a room full of belongings that no one would find of any value other than us. Ooh, sorry, other than us. Part of what I found was a drawer full of his t-shirts that he slept in. And when we were cleaning them out, they still smelled like him. So in my wanting to hold on to everything left of him, I asked my mom if I could have them. She graciously said yes. And I started giving them to other people as they were going through grief and loss and letting them demonstrate their feelings with use of this t-shirt. So I'm showing them to you as individual people. In the gallery, they're not really shown this way. They're shown in a series. So for example, this is my mom. And so when I show that, it's usually 5 or 7, and she's wrestling as she's putting the t-shirt on, taking it off, putting it on, taking it back off. They're also not shown traditionally matted or mounted. Instead, they're push-pinned. They're about 30 by 36. They're push-pinned to the wall using dissection pins. So they kind of hang purposely. So I think that for a lot of artists, particularly if you've been dealing with something for a project for a while that's intensely emotional, sometimes you need to change pace. I was there. And about the same time I saw the movie, the remake, A Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And there's this crazy moment where he's hiking up in the middle of nowhere in the Himalayan mountains and his cell phone rings, and he answers it, right? And I started thinking about this craziness of this new appendage we have. You know, I admit it. I'm answering emails the second my foot hit the floor in the morning. I'm checking Facebook on the way to the bathroom. It's sort of nuts. So I decided I wanted to do a project critiquing this. And to me, it made sense that if I'm going to critique this, to use the actual medium that I was critiquing. So I started by going to very remote places and photographing using my cell phone. Then I would take my cell phone and run it through this cool little gadget I had found called the Impossible Project, and it would spit out a Polaroid, old-fashioned Polaroid of that image. And then I was taking those and putting them through an emulsion lift transfer onto drawing paper. And I did all that kind of laborious process because those kind of transfers fade. They don't last. And I entitled the whole project Bread and Circuses. So bread and circuses was a phrase used by the Roman emperor, and what it was referencing was their tactic of feeding and entertaining the masses in order to distract them from imminent doom of the empire. And I kind of say, as long as we have Facebook and McDonald's, I think we're sort of ignoring bigger picture things like global warming, right? So that's really what this project became about. So now I've kind of come full circle. In about 2015, I went back to Georgia State and to finish up a second graduate program in women, gender, and sexuality studies. And while I was there, I got very interested in this notion of othered bodies. And what I mean by that is that in society, anything that is not the norm being maleness, cisgenderedness, whiteness, we label or we other, and it contributes to that oppression and the marginalization of those communities. They get homogenized. So I wanted to find a visual way of representing this homogenization of all these different other communities that are labeled just because they're not male, cis, white. There were two things that became really important to me about this. The first was that this became a collaborative project. Again, I wanted to own my privilege as a photographer aiming a camera at somebody. So I didn't direct them. They knew they were coming in to have paint poured over them. But I let them respond to that in whatever way they felt inclined. So you'll see some people act very angry, some kind of defeated, but I allowed them to respond whatever way was natural. The second was that I wanted to show as much diversity as I possibly could to get at all these different types of people that are marginalized. So you have Black, women, transgender, lesbian, gay, disabled, and all, again, looking at that like the larger community in the way that all of these various people are homogenized. So it kind of brings me to where I am today, which is continuing this. So right now I'm still working on a video, and then I've started mapping out an installation idea on the same topic. The difference being that recently I realized that the one community I had fallen short to represent were documented and undocumented immigrants. And so it's really kind of like taking the project in that direction as well to make sure that I include them. So thank you so much.